kind of combine those. But anyway, this game is very good. It is incredible. But like I was saying before, it is Breath of the Wild exploded. It is way bigger than Breath of the Wild. Even Breath of the Wild was a huge game. This game is bigger than that game. I'm 10 hours in, and but I have an idea of what I'm 10 hours in at this point, and like I'm going around. I don't want to spoil too much of the game itself. Like what are their shrines and that kind of thing. Um, I want to kind of look at Kind of Funny's review and see what they think of it and who's on it. So I'm gonna do that. We'll kind of see what they talk about and that kind of thing, and we'll give our thoughts on it. I'm gonna react to this review.
Different types.
But I want to give a little bit more thoughts. So I don't want to get too spoilery, but I am going to get a little bit spoilery here. So if you don't want any expectation, you don't know anything about Tears of the Kingdom, don't watch this. That's what I'm going to say. Are there shrines? Yes, there are shrines. They're way better, in my opinion, than the shrines in the original, in Breath of the Wild. I love the shrines in Breath of the Wild, but these shrines are so good. They're so creative. They're so fun. Even the ones that are like combat based, you usually have some sort of like you had the combat based shrines in Breath of the Wild, but they were just like fight this little shrine guardian kind of thing. But in Tears of the Kingdom, they usually have some sort of something else on top of that. They have like they take away all your equipment, and you can only use certain abilities and that kind of thing, or you have to put a vehicle to get together and kind of take them out with that. And just to, I'll also say again, you have none of your abilities really from the original game. There is one that is pretty much magnesis, but it's magnesis where you can interact with way more things. It's pretty much you can pick up like boxes, or you can pick up wood, metal, whatever else, just things for run in the world. But so you have completely new powers in this game. You don't have any of your previous ones, so you don't go in thinking you'll be able to freeze enemies. You can't, at least not so far. Maybe eventually, but I'm 10 hours in. I can't do that. There's no like you're not making ice come out here. That's not in this game. What is in this game is you're combining items, and you're combining you're making constructs, and some people will probably get intimidated by that. They're like, what is this, Minecraft? It's not Minecraft. It's Zelda with like some building mechanics where you can put together like a raft, and you use that raft to get from one place to another. You can put together like a sled, or you can fly a hot air balloon or something like that. It's pretty much it's in service of the game, of the world that Breath of the Wild was in. This game takes place in that same world, although it's you go back to places where you visited in Breath of the Wild and see how they've changed over the years and that kind of thing. And then on top of that, you have there's something that I'm not going to spoil, even if I'm going tippy-toeing into spoilers. But I'll say that this game is way bigger than you're going to expect, and the world is bigger. You have the Sky Islands. I'll talk about that just because they're in the marketing material for Zelda. But yeah, the game is super good. It is more Breath of the Wild, but it's also way more than just Breath of the Wild. So if you love Breath of the Wild, you love Tears of the Kingdom. Period.
Of video games, from the giant AAA blockbusters all the way to the smaller indie titles. We have sequels, we have new IP, we have remakes, we have remasters, we have reboots. But every once in a while, we get an event game. A game that...
I am curious what people will think about... I'm curious about the performance on the Switch, for one. And I'm curious to see like what kind of updates are going to be.
Transcends more than just what we expect from whatever. We expect Game of the Year quality. Whether it's Final Fantasy VII Remake, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring. This is the Kind of Funny Games cast. And today, we have another event game. The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, will be reviewed by Blessing Adeoye Jr.
That's me. What's up?
I'm Tim Geddes, the host of the Kind of Funny Games cast. I am joined by.
I'm curious if it's only Blessing that's played the game, or if Tim has also played it. I know Andy hasn't, and I'm pretty sure Greg hasn't. If it's only Blessing, that's interesting. I want to know what Tim thinks as well, especially.
Asagayoye Jr. himself.
Good afternoon, Tim.
How many hours have you put into Zelda?
I've played 70 hours of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
That's not enough, dude.
And
No
I
way.
cannot wait to ask you so many questions because you are the only person that has been able to play this game at Kind of Funny. Normally for reviews, we try to get a whole bunch of different voices, including the Big Daddy himself, Greg Miller.
Not only is he the only person who's played this game, he has not talked to us about it. I've asked, what would you give? How's it? And he just gives me some BS answer and walks away.
Yeah. So here we are with the Texas Street Latino Heat, clicking heads and ripping them to shreds. The globe-trotting, head-shotting, rootin' tootin', three-point shooting, nitro rifle.
I will say, he said he's 70 hours in. I don't think you can be even 70 hours in the game and have touched nearly everything in the game at this point. I will say that. It is huge, this game. Because I can spend 70 hours just going from shrine to shrine and just exploring the Sky Islands that you can access at the moment. Because there's some of them that you can't even get to at the moment. You have to figure out other ways to get there. Probably through quests and stuff like that. So, it's like... And there's other things out there that I'm not going to spoil. But there's more. Oh, there's more.
Rifle from Twitch.tv, Andy Cortez.
I was really worried that Bless is going to lose his Switch on an airplane again.
I know. We had this conversation where, like, I almost traveled somewhere, and Tim was like, oh, yeah, you can just take your Switch with you. And I'm like, no.
No.
I'm not taking my Switch anywhere with this game on it.
Absolutely not. You will be thrown in Nintendo jail.
Exactly.
For the rest of your life. I want to skip all this stuff, all right? Real quick, you already know. This is the Kind of Funny Games cast. Each and every week, we get together to talk about video games and all the things.
I want to skip all the stuff, but I'm going to
No, I want to skip
But I'm going to do it.
the how we do
But
it,
I'm
how
gonna
we
do
doing,
it.
how we doing stuff. You know what I mean? We can talk about that on any other plethora of shows we have over here. YouTube.com/kindoffunnygames. Of course, get the show ad-free. Patreon.com/kindoffunny. And search all your favorite podcast services and subscribe to Kind of Funny Games Cast. P.S. I love you, XOXO. Kind of Funny Games Daily. Kind of Funny Xcast. Because this summer, we're about to be gaming, folks. We're about to be gaming hard. We're going to be talking about everything. But review season's been going. We got to.
There are a lot of games coming out this summer. We have this just started. Tears of the Kingdom is the first big release. Then, in a couple weeks, we have Diablo, Street Fighter, Final Fantasy, plus whatever minor, smaller games are coming out. Those are the big four. Those are the big four, though. We just had Jedi Survivor, which people love. It's a game I still need to play more of. This is a crazy release year. We haven't had one of these in a long time, due to the pandemic. A lot of these games we've been anticipating for a while. So it's nice that we're finally here.
Continue it going on right now. Thank you to our Patreon producer, Delaney Twining, for helping all this happen. And Shady Rays, our sponsor, but we'll tell you about that later.
Thank you.
Without further ado, Bless, I want to get right into it. What do you think about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom?
It's incredible. It's the thing you expect because, of course, we played Zelda Breath of the Wild. A lot of us here absolutely adore Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games of all time. Playing through Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, this game pretty much takes Breath of the Wild and amps up every single element, so much so that this game makes Breath of the Wild feel like practice for making Tears of the Kingdom. The world is a lot bigger. Like, think about how big you think this game is and multiply that by at least 2, possibly. The story is bigger and better, and I'd say more engaging. That was one of my things when I played Breath of the Wild originally, is that I for that game, I wanted a little bit more out of story. There are other Zelda stories that I would say that I enjoyed more, and I think this game brought it in terms of story, characters, the memories make it come back. And, like, I know people feel each and every way about the memories, but I think this time around, they found a way to make memories, one, easier to collect, but then also a bit more pertinent to what's happening in, like, the modern Link story, and so they feel a bit more important and engaging. The abilities are expanded and feel a little bit more complex this time around, and I think that makes it so that in the first 10 hours or so, I found myself, like, really struggling with the controls, trying to figure out, all right, I can fuse whatever, I can, like, ascend whatever, like, what does that mean in terms of how I can really use the abilities? Around 20 hours in, those abilities start singing in a way where it feels like I can do anything. Like, I am creating vehicles, I'm creating flying vehicles, I'm creating cars, I am solving all of my problems and obstacles just by fusing things together, and that system really does feel so expanded and so like limitless, way more limitless than even the abilities felt like in the previous game. But then also like that feeling of adventure feels restored once again from Zelda Breath of the Wild. Like you're getting a lot of that feeling of, man, I am just exploring and taking everything at my own pace, and I am discovering things, and it feels like I am really carving out my own adventure. That feeling feels doubled down here in this game in a number of ways, but I think for me it comes back to the fact that this is 1000% the sequel to Breath of the Wild, and there's a lot of different ways I can take that, but those are my initial thoughts.
Going from there, what score would you give it on the Kind of Funny scale? And Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild being your favorite game of all time, is it better?
So on the scale, I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. It is an amazing game, but not only is it amazing, I would say that this game is a masterpiece. And on the question of is it better than Breath of the Wild, that's a difficult one because that's one that I need time, right? Like,
It's a tough question to answer. Is Tears of the Kingdom better than Breath of the Wild? I think Breath of the Wild, this game, it's kind of like revisiting a place you've been before years later, and you kind of see the changes and you meet the same people, but they've changed a little bit. They're not quite the same anymore. And it's more about the environments, and the environments aren't the same. You can explore caves in this game, or where in areas that you've been before in the previous game, where there weren't caves there before. You can go, kind of underground. You can kind of go higher, than you could before. So it is. It's tough to say if this game is better than Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the Wild, you still have the shrines, you still have the original power sets, you still have, just that experience of leaving the Great Plateau for the first time and that panoramic shot, and you still have, I think the simplicity of Breath of the Wild people will want to go back to and still experience even with Tears of the Kingdom out, because Tears of the Kingdom is way better. It is more complex than Breath of the Wild was. It's not, you're not going to break your brain over it, but there is more going on. You have more options. You have more, that you can be doing in this game. And there's still so much you can be experiencing. But if you want simplicity, you just want to explore, you just want to go from one place to another, complete some shrines, that kind of thing, Breath of the Wild is still there. I don't think it's necessarily... This game does not make Breath of the Wild obsolete. Like, I think Breath of the Wild kind of did to previous Zelda games. Breath of the Wild, for me, was an evolution of Zelda. Tears of the Kingdom is kind of like the next step of that, rather than something that makes the Breath of the Wild obsolete.
Like Breath
Fair.
of the Wild, I never called Breath of the Wild my favorite game until after a year of playing it. Like it was after year one where I was like, I think this might be one of my favorite games of all time, and now it's there. But what I will say is that I think Tears of the Kingdom is in the conversation. Like it's in the conversation of being the best Zelda. It's in the conversation for sure of being better than Breath of the Wild. I think the fact that everything is amped up this time around, you can make the clear argument. I think the one thing is that I'll say that like Breath of the Wild is so special because that was the first time it did it. Tears of the Kingdom is doing that again, right? It's doing it again, but so much of it feels familiar because you are exploring the same Hyrule. You are engaging with a lot of the same systems in terms of like how the weather works and how the climbing works and how the shrines are. There are shrines in this game. Like a lot of that stuff feels like it is taking all of the bones of Breath of the Wild and pushing it forward, but it does push it forward, and I think that's the big thing. And so I'll say like a yes, maybe, to is it better than Breath of the Wild?
That's a great answer. It's a great answer so
Yes.
far.
See, my thing with the argument between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom versus the older Zelda games, Ocarina of Time, in my opinion, they never went beyond that formula for any other Zelda game. They had something perfect with Ocarina of Time, and then they did it again. And we'll say the same because Majora's Mask was built on the bones of Ocarina of Time, and then they did it again in Wind Waker. Then they did it again in Twilight Princess, and they did it again in Skyward Sword. They were all very similar systems, and the formula was very similar. Some people definitely want that, but some people want something more, And it took Breath of the Wild for us for them to give us something that expands on what Zelda can be, It made Zelda great again. in my opinion, rather than just it's a game that comes out every couple of years and it's really good, you know. But Breath of the Wild made it great, amazing, perfect, not perfect, but masterpiece. And Tears of the Kingdom kind of it expands on that.
It is the same Hyrule in
Mhm.
theory. I mean, years are in between them, obviously. Does it feel like it? Are you coming upon things like, oh, I remember this, or if I know if I just go over this ledge, cliff, whatever, I'm going to see this? Does it feel like well-worn territory, or does it feel completely different?
I carved my initials in the rocks down here. It's still here. Wow.
Wow.
That's crazy.
1000%. Like it feels like the same Hyrule, but that comes back to the idea of this is a sequel to Zelda Breath of the Wild. It does a thing that I didn't realize I wanted until I got further into the game, because my first 10 hours, I was a little bit underwhelmed because it felt like I was playing Breath of the Wild again.
Sure.
It felt like, okay, I'm back in Hyrule. The game does the thing where it's like, hey, here are 4 big objectives. Go after the 4 big objectives. And those 4 big objectives take place in 4 familiar regions. If you played Breath of the Wild, you can guess the direction that it takes you in Tears of the Kingdom.
Can I stop you right there real quick?
Go for it.
Spoiler wise, how do you
Mhm.
want to address this of where we're going for people that might not want anything ruined for their experience on Zelda Breath or Tears of the Kingdom?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into story spoilers. I'm not going to get into characters or plot or anything like that. I will talk about game structure. And so I'm going to talk about the main mission and where that takes you, how it goes about I'm going to talk about things like shrines being in the game. I'm going to answer the big questions, but story spoilers I'm going to stay away from. So if you're somebody who wants to go in blind, maybe play some of the game and come back, but I'm going to be very open in terms of talking about things. But I'm going to try not to spoil vital things.
And leave a comment and say, I'm coming back. Don't worry, Bless.
Exactly. But yeah, to go back to your question, right? Like this is the sequel to Breath of the Wild. So what that means is, like I was saying, right? You got the 4 big objectives. It's taking you to similar places. All of those, the same layout of Hyrule is there. So you know where Zora's domain is. You know where Rito's village is. You know where Gerudo Valley is. Like all of that stuff is the same. You're gonna see a lot of the same points of interest. The thing that makes it
One thing I will say, I wish more games did this. I wish more games had a sequel that took place in the same world as the one we had in the previous game, so we could experience those changes. Like, there's a couple games that I will use as an example, one is Yakuza, which takes place in, I forget the name of the area in Yakuza, but I know that they all take place in the same region, pretty much the same part of a city, and from one game to another, you will meet the same people, and you will be able to see how their lives evolved and that kind of thing. And the Trail series, which is one of my favorite JRPG series, you have Sky FC and Sky SC, and then Sky the Third. They all take place. Sky the Third is kind of different. Well, we'll ignore that one. Sky FC and the SC take place in the same place. Zemuria, the Liberl, and you go from one city to another in Liberl, and you do that in both games. So you get to see how their lives have, the people that you met before, how their lives have changed and evolved, and what's changed, that kind of thing. The Crossbell games and Trails does the same thing, where you play through Zero, you meet all these characters, and you go back in Azure, and you meet and you see where they're at now, a few months later. It's not like Tears of the Kingdom where it's years later, but for the most part. Although that did change in Trails of Cold Steel, where you had 1 and 2, where you're playing as Reen and Class 7, and then 3 and 4 you're playing as it's a few years later. So, or not a few years, but a year and a half. So it is nice to see. I wish there were some. It's hard to say give a good example of a game that I would love to see do that. Like Final Fantasy VII, being able to see Midgar, and the people around that world, how their lives have changed since the events of Final Fantasy VII would be cool, So yeah, and it's nice to be able to do that in Breath of the Wild.
really interesting, and that made it really fun coming back to this
Tears
world,
of the Kingdom.
fact that everything is moved on in some way, and so you're going to return to the Rito place, and it's going to be okay, what's going on here, what is the story progression that's happened to where you're breathing new life into this place.
Oh, they got a CVS now. That's
It's like, oh shit, yeah, like, they got a Dollar General.
Look at
Holy
them
shit.
expanding here.
But like an example I'll give is that Lurelin Village, which is a village that you just happened to come across in the previous game in Breath of the Wild. In that game, it was just a fishing village, right? You come here, there's a shrine, there's people hanging out, and like you can talk to people and you'll get side quests or whatever, but it's not really a major location. As I was exploring the map, I was like, oh shit, Lurelin Village, let's check in on what's happening there. And Bokoblins had taken over. Like,
Oh,
it had,
no.
yeah, like this is funny enough. I told that to Barrett. He had the exact same reaction.
I mean, I was just sad. Look at
Exactly.
that. Fishing village decimated. You know?
Yeah, but like there's
The
Bokoblins
Bokoblins
there.
were like, we were here first.
and so basically,
Taking it back.
like you go there and it's like, all right, cool, let's fight off these Bokoblins. Like, let's do this thing. And in pretty much every single major or minor point of interest in Breath of the Wild, there's been some twist. There's been something that's happened to bring it forward. But then on top of that, right, there is newness in the Sky Islands and in
Sure.
the ways in which there's been like an upheaval, right? Like we've seen in the trailers, Hyrule Castle is like risen from the ground. And so what that means for Tears of the Kingdom is that the geometry of the world has changed a bit. There are new caves, there are new things to explore, right? Like things have been shaken up in a lot of ways, and like that upheaval will then apply to going back to certain places and being like, oh, what's happened here? But it's the same but different, right? It feels like you're coming back to the same world, but there's time has passed.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Mm-hmm.
It'll show how much of a media blackout I've done my best to be on for this game. I could have. Is this not a prequel? Is this actually this
Oh, it's
is
a
going
sequel.
forward? It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Was there a rumor early on that we all thought, looking at trailers, it was going to be a prequel? For some reason, I thought we were doing
I've
the
spouted
thing.
out like a million different theories.
That it was
Okay.
Ganon back in the day.
I think people thought that this was going to be another time jump. It's going to be going back and forth between like old time Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, old time Hyrule and new time Hyrule, because we saw like Link with the older garb, and then you have Link in the his updated like Hyrule champion armor, and like some scenes he's like has a messed up arm, and other scenes he doesn't. People assumed there was two different Links or Link in different time periods, but that's not the case. I'll just say that.
Well, yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
At least not so far.
So, I mean, just going off of this with the comparisons, because I know it's on a lot of people's minds.
Mhm.
We've had a lot of great duologies recently, like even looking at Last of Us, looking at God of War Ragnarok, where I think that there was like a lot of expectation for the sequel to not only, meet the expectations we have, but to even go beyond that and like be even bigger and better. Where the first one was a revolution, what can the second one do? Do you think that this is in that same conversation that we've seen for those games?
It reminds me a bit of the review for God of War Ragnarok, where one of the first things I mentioned was playing God of War Ragnarok felt like I was picking the controller back up from the end of God of War 2018, and Tears of the Kingdom feels like I'm picking up the controller from the end of Breath of the Wild, right? But of course, like more time has passed, and like in the way that for me, the big worry with Ragnarok and the big worry for Tears of the Kingdom has been living up to the original entry. Is this going to be as big and great and as special as that original release? I think it hits all that in ways that I just didn't expect, right? It's been 6 years since Breath of the Wild. That game came out in 2017. We're now in 2023. And so picking up the controller and having the game move the same as Breath of the Wild, having the environments be similar in terms of, okay, I know what this Hyrule is, having the combat be the same, having like the sound design, having a lot of that stuff be similar.
And being like, I can't remap the buttons.
And being like, I can't remap the buttons the way I want to, except for the jump button and the sprint button. Those are things where upon first booting up the game, I was a bit taken aback. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a lot more of the same. But the more you play, the more you start to see where the 6 years come in. Like, it is content packed. It feels like they took a lot of the feedback in terms of, oh man, but like the world is empty. Like, oh, I want more. Like, yada yada. And they've by the time I like stepped out into the open world and I look around, it feels like a bit more of a jam packed Hyrule. Points of interest were everywhere in a really cool way. And then you look toward the Sky Islands, you look toward the story content, and so much of that stuff is bringing it. Like the idea of Breath of the Wild feeling like a tee up for this game to finally fulfill that full vision of what they want this thing to be. It feels like it's there. It feels like this is, oh shit, y'all put your everything into this. And so yeah, I think it's in the conversation of I think it lives up for sure to what Breath of the Wild set up. But yeah, I think it's going to be in the conversation of duologies and like, oh man, I can't believe how well this thing nailed it. Especially like, I don't know if there's gonna be a third game after this, but like, yeah, I feel I
Tim always asks some awkward questions that are hard to answer. Like, is it the best duology of all time? Like, who knows? Like, it's always a little weird the way he can word some stuff.
I think for the 1-2 punch of Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom,
Like comparing Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to The Last of Us and Part 2 and God of War Ragnarok. It's a little hard to do that because they are so different. Like, yes, I think that Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom are better games than than The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 and God of War Ragnarok. But are they better duologies? Or do they tell a better story than those games? Do they tell a better, I don't know about that one. Who knows?
for sure, this thing succeeded.
On May 3rd, 7:57 a.m., I was able to get the following out of you. It's incredible, but it's a gigantic game.
Mhm.
Maybe the biggest / most jam-packed open world I've ever played.
Yeah.
Do you stand? Is it, now that you're done with it and you've put 70 hours in it, is it the most jam-packed world? And what does that mean exactly? Is it that everyone has a quest?
I don't think 70 hours. You can't be 70 hours and done with this game, period. You can't be. I played Elden Ring. Elden Ring feels smaller than this game does. Elden Ring is huge. Elden Ring is, in my opinion, probably the biggest open world game I've ever played. And Tears of the Kingdom right now feels bigger than that. Feels like there's more to do in this game than there was in Elden Ring, which makes me excited for what could be like if they were to do this with Elden Ring. Like, obviously we have the Elden Ring DLC, but if they were to take Elden Ring, the Lands Between, and like we revisit that world a few years later, obviously the endings of Elden Ring kind of make that a little bit difficult because it kind of feels like they're closing the door on that area, that location. But what if they did? What if like we saw like the endings? One of the ending they made one of the endings canon to Elden Ring, and kind of you continue the story of Elden Ring in that same region. You revisit those areas and those characters and that kind of thing. It's a little bit harder because not really, because the characters in Breath of the Wild didn't really play all that big of a big part of the story, and Elden Ring is kind of similar in that way, and you kill a lot of characters anyway. But yeah.
Best, or is it that there's just shit everywhere?
It's it's big, right? Like it's that like there's a lot to do. The Sky Islands and new like the new elements they've added into to the map make it just so expansive, and I feel like I can play this game forever, right? Like I'm 70 hours in and I still have a laundry list of things to do. Like I was talking to Barrett the other day about how like he's asking questions about the game and I'm like, oh yeah, I've done this thing, I've gone here, I've done this, and Barrett's like, oh, have you visited Terrytown? And I'm like, no, I really want to, and I'm 70 hours into the game.
Yeah.
And there are still things that I desperately want to do because I've had those moments in Breath of the Wild, and I know that like if I go to a place like Terrytown, or if I go to a different location like the Lost Woods or like Eventide Island, I know there are probably going to be big things waiting for me there because those are special moments from the original game. But 70 hours in, there's still so much left that I want to do, and I've completed the story, of course, and like I've done so much, but it feels like it keeps going, and there's more I want to talk about. But like, and to answer that question more, but I'm saving some stuff for like the second half because again, I don't want to spoil this game for people.
You want to give people a real chance to get off. You've listened, you did. Now get off. The bus is going to spoilerist town.
I wanted to ask, Bless, you mentioned around the 20-hour mark that's when all the abilities start to really that's when you feel like you can really utilize everything, and that's when you felt most comfortable and not super overwhelmed by all the mechanics at the beginning. That feeling that you mentioned of this is more than just a sequel, this is way more than just Breath of the Wild. How long did it take for that? What, like you mentioned, you noticing, oh, this is where the 6 hours of development or the 6 years of development went into. At what moment did you kind of like, oh shit, I see this now?
I think it came in waves where in the first few hours of playing the game, I'm exploring Hyrule and I come across a thing and I'm like, oh, it's a little cave, like let's go in there. And I'm like, I go and I'm like, oh shit, like this is different. Like this is not what I expected from.
So for me, he was talking about a cave, and I want to talk about a cave because I experienced this not too long ago. It's not going to be a huge spoiler or anything like that. So, but if you're worried about it, you don't want anything ruined for you, don't listen. But this is not going to be. It's not a story spoiler. It's not nothing like that. But it is just like, and who knows? There's probably plenty of caves like this where you go into it, and there's like a ruin there, and then you can kind of mess with like the water levels and stuff like that, and you kind of there's more to it than meets the eye, and that sort of thing. That was like that's one of those moments in a video game where I'm like, wow, this is where all this work went into. That's what you don't see that too often. It's just something simple like that where you're kind of like spelunking, and then all of a sudden you found something. It's like you found something in like a lost civilization or something like that. You know, it's like you don't see that in video games too often, and or in anywhere really, because you can't. There's not really like lost civilizations in real life. You know, there's not really open world video games that let you go and find like, you know, just stumble upon something. That's not like a main story beat or anything like that.
From this game, right? Like there are so many new things here, just in terms of like things to discover and things to explore. But then also when we're talking about the abilities and you know, I'll talk about them, right? Like you got the new fuse ability, you got the ultra hand ability, you got ascend, and you got recall, which is way different from the rune abilities that you had in Breath of the Wild, right? Where it is you can, you know, freeze time with stasis. You have like, you know, cryonis, I believe, which is like the ice blocks that you can pull up and all that stuff.
Cryonesis, but I call it frozen block power. And some people in my chat were like, "That's not what it's called, man." I was like, "It's frozen block power to me."
Yeah.
I was like, are those getting added to like a separate row?
No,
or...
like you just don't have those anymore.
Oh,
yeah.
shit.
So you do not have the abilities from Breath of the Wild. They've been replaced by the ultra hand fuse and stuff. And so like this game,
Zelda sucked them out of you.
Really?
Good lord.
It was in a visual novel that came out 2 years ago. You gotta.
I'm gonna leave it open to your interpretation, but I was looking at like a Palpatine kind of stuff.
Got it.
All right,
Okay. Got it.
you guys have dirty minds. That's on you.
Sorry.
But because of these new abilities, I am looking at this game in an entirely different way. You know, like you're playing Breath of the Wild, and it is all right. Like there's an island over there. Let me use the frozen block power to then like make this path for me to jump to the next thing. In this game, early on, there was a shrine that was that like I had water that I needed to traverse through to get there, but it was too long because I didn't have the stamina I needed to get there. And so legit, I'm like sitting there, like I'm racking my brain. I'm like, how do I do this? And I'm like, wait a second. I can fuse together a boat. And so I look around and I find some trees. I chop down the trees. I combined 4 different logs. I put 2 fans on the back of it. I put like a sail on it, and then like I get one of those korok leaves to then like wave the air.
Nice.
And I get to the shrine that way, and I'm like, oh damn, like I would never I wouldn't think that way in Breath of the Wild, and there are so many options to do that.
There are so many more. There's so like that's a very basic thing that he just described. There's so much more to it that you can do, because you can put like, I don't want to go into every single like little mechanics that you can put on, but you have steering sticks, and you can put on you have like a cart that you can ride. You can kind of like make a scooter, pretty much a motorized scooter. You can make one of those in this game. You can make a makeshift like my one issue is there is one tool that you can't use just anywhere, like the kind of frustrating, and it lets you fly around and like and glide and stuff like that, which would be cool. But I guess it would be broken if you could, but that's my one issue. But that you could use that still to, you know, kind of fly from one place to another, and then kind of like use your glider to make it the rest away or something like that.
Type of shit in Tears of the Kingdom, and it just totally opens up things and opens up the puzzle solving shit. There are moments where
The point is, there's so many options for you to tackle different things, so many different ways.
I was struggling with shrines because, you know, there's a certain shrine I went to that had rails that I needed to like basically grind through to like get to like the next platform or whatever, and I couldn't figure out exactly how to build the thing. And so I left and I came back and I was like, oh shit, okay, I see now. Like,
Tony Hawk is like, heard you need to skateboard.
Tony Hawk, I heard you need help. But I basically needed to combine boards in a way where I had one long board. I took a second board, rotated it 90 degrees, placed it in the middle, and then put like the long board through the rail. And then by doing it that way, I was able to actually grind the way through. And it's those kinds of like puzzles and like those kinds of deeper systems that feel like they're doing way more than what I was doing in Breath of the Wild.
Is it as easy as it sounds and looks?
At first, it was complicated. At first, it was a bit to figure out because, again, my brain just wasn't thinking that way.
Sure.
And also, like, the controls for specifically Ultra Hand,
It's tough.
it's tough. It takes a little bit to get used to because it is a lot of rotating things, figuring out how you can fuse things in certain ways, figuring out what different tools do. And so, like, there's a group of tools in the game, a group of items in the game that are these Zonai tools. And they're different devices like fans, rockets, levers. There's like a fire hydrant, like these weird tools that belong to this ancient race that
You got an air
function-
fryer.
an air fryer. Like honestly, like it's shit like that. But like they function in a specific like advanced kind of way. And so for a fan, for example, and for any of these, you hit them and they turn on, right? They're powered by power. And so like you hit them, they turn on and they like have some kind of function. Right now, Barrett's showing a fire hydrant. That's like a Zonai fire hydrant. And so like
My
You-
God, it's our technology.
What's this little
It's to make
green
the
bar?
motorcycle feel less.
So the green bar is another meter you have. The green bar is basically like the power you have to use the Zonai tools. And so you hit it, and then it starts taking away from the power. But like right now, the vid that Barrett is showing, I had a Bokoblin arm, and I used the fuse ability to fuse the Bokoblin arm to the fire hydrant to create a hydrant hammer. So now when I swing the hydrant, it spews out water. And like again, these are this shit feels limitless. Like I feel like a crazy person
It's not always practical because I don't know what you would do with that, but it's cool that it's there. Like you can do that.
explaining it, but legitimately it works out in that way. Where I did the same thing with a fan. I had one of the Zonai fans, and I was like, "What happens if I fuse this to a sword?" And I fused it to a sword, and I went and I fought a Bokoblin with it, and I swung at the Bokoblin, and like the wind of the fan blew it away. There was another one where one of the tools is a mirror, and so like then this is maybe like 40, 50 hours
Makes
into
the
the
Bokoblin
game.
reflect on himself.
Exactly.
Oh God, this is what I look like.
It's like, oh, shit,
I see my dad in this when I fight you.
But for the mirror, that's an item that I found in a shrine, and I was struggling on the shrine. I was like, what the fuck does this mirror do? I can't figure this out. And like just by like banging shit together, I fused the mirror to my shield, and I was like, all right, that didn't do shit. And then I come to realize that I just had to hold up there was a room I was missing, so I had to take the mirror, go to that room, use it to reflect light, and I figured out the shrine. Hours and hours and hours later, I'm hanging out in the open world outside, and I'm like,
Smoking a cigarette, reading the paper, just hanging out in the open world.
and I come across a Bokoblin, I start fighting the Bokoblin, and in the middle of our fight, I like whip out my shield, and I forget that I have the shield that had the mirror attached to it that looked really goofy, and I was like, oh shit. And as soon as I pulled it out, the light from the sun reflected off of the shield and shined into the Bokoblin's face, and the Bokoblin like went blind for a second and started freaking out.
Oh,
and I was like, what
shit.
the fuck, dude? I didn't even know that was a thing. And that like for me, that's where it comes in terms of, oh, this really does feel limitless in terms of the things I can do. I can combine whatever and like make new things and solve problems that way. And as I'm 70 hours in, I am still discovering things I can put together to create new things, and it's a really cool feeling.
I think that was always the thing that blew me away the most about Breath of the Wild is the nature of like if this then that. Like we talk about when you make this world limitless, if you stand in the electricity or if you stand in the water and then lightning hits and you're in the water, then it electrocutes you, all that sort of stuff.
So I'm going to skip this and interacting with the world. I'm going to look at the performance because I'm curious about
They can't run
what they say
XYZ.
about it.
What is performance like on this? What are the graphics like on this? How does it stack up in 2023?
It looks like Breath of the Wild, and it runs similarly to Breath of the Wild, right? Which is, I think, going to be maybe good and bad news depending on who you are, because Breath of the Wild did have those moments where you go to the Lost Woods or you go to a area that has a lot of stuff going on screen, and you see the game start slowing down a little bit. But for me, that didn't bother me too much playing Breath of the Wild, and now that I'm playing Tears of the Kingdom, it doesn't bother me too much here also. the thing that has impressed me actually with how the game runs is that I've not gotten one bug, I've not gotten one glitch. The game has not crashed once, and I'm doing
Wow.
insane things in this game. I am building like I've connected.
I am a god.
I am connecting 9 different objects, and I am banging them against geometry, and the game's not buckling. And for me, that is way more of a technological feat of how in the world did you do this, Nintendo? Like I cannot believe this game isn't crashing based on the things that I'm doing. So there is that. On the flip side, there have been a couple of moments where I am on a sky island, one of the islands in the sky. I jump off, I dive down, and like this happens few and far between, but the game will freeze for a second to try and load in the area that I'm diving into because I'm diving way too fast.
Gotcha.
That's like those are the few moments where I have been like, where I have noticed, okay, the game is doing too much here. Like you can't keep up with what you're doing. But it's never felt like it's broken. It's more so been a thing of, okay, you're gonna load for a second. All right, cool. Now we're actually gonna get to the ground. But for the most part, it has been seamless of me jumping off of a sky island and then getting to the ground. And it like you're high up there. Like you'll be diving for a minute, and the draw distance is incredible. Like it doesn't feel real. Some of the things that they do
As you
with
fall
this
out of the air here, tagging all the different things you want to go see.
yeah.
Imagine what
exactly.
they could do with
The
capable
power-
hardware.
with power. Wait, real
Okay, go
quick,
ahead.
staying on the
Sorry.
performance here. What was your balance between docked and handheld mode for this, and was there any difference or
Mhm.
anything you want to say about that?
I played on docked for the most part, just because that's usually how I play a lot of my Switch stuff, and that's how I played Breath of the Wild. And looked and ran similarly to Breath of the Wild. I busted out handheld for a little bit, and I'm playing on my OLED screen, and noticeably it does look real good on handheld. And I played Breath of the Wild before the OLED Switch came out, and so like this was my first experience playing it on OLED, and that shit looked popping.
OLED's hug.
It looked
Let's
it looked
go.
really great. And so yeah, like visually again, like it is what you expect from playing that previous game. One thing I will say, and I don't know if this was something that they pushed forward or if this is just a circumstantial thing. When you're in the Sky Islands, the lighting is way more direct, obviously, because you're way higher in the sky and the sun is hitting you directly. My first time like walking out of a structure and I'm on a sky island looking around, I was like, oh shit, this looks really cool. Like something here in the lighting and the visuals here is hitting more than I remember Breath of the Wild hitting. But I think that might just be the different location and what they probably had to do to like account for being in the sky. I don't know. It's not overall visually it's not necessarily a big step forward from how Breath of the Wild looks as far as like what I've noticed. I've booted up Breath of the Wild now since playing this game to kind of like compare and contrast. It seems like it looks similar for the most part. But yeah, when you're in the sky, there's a brightness and a contrast here that I do dig.
Breath of the Wild docked ran a decent amount worse, right? Because it was trying to do 1080,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it had a bit more like frame drops and performance issues. Because handheld is 720, right? So I think if I remember that docked was doing 1080, and you had a bit more issues trying to run the game at that resolution. But you're saying that you didn't notice a whole lot of hitches or really a whole lot of difference between either or?
No, not really. Like from
Okay.
docked to handheld.
Yeah.
No, not
Okay.
really. Like I'm sure it's similar. Like I don't remember when I was playing handheld. I don't think I went to any like heavily forced areas. I'm sure it's the exact same result
Yeah.
in terms of it's better.
I'm not gonna watch this whole getting into the gameplay stuff because you guys can experience that on your own. This is just a brief look at Tears of the Kingdom, and I'll vouch for it. It's a good game, great game. Go play it. Comes out tonight, actually, at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. EST. That's what I read on the internet. Hopefully it's true. Well, apparently it's you can, if you are in New Zealand, you're playing it right now. That's the way I understand it. And you can, if you live in NA, you can use some fudgy stuff and switch your region over to New Zealand. You have access to the game. So, if you can do that, if you want to do that, go ahead. I'm not stopping you. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. It's a free world. To me, I think you should play a game in the best quality that is accessible to you. But you should still also support the dev. So buy the game. But if you want to play it if you can play it on PC via an emulator and it looks way better on PC than it does on Switch, do it. That's how I feel. Anyway, Tears of the Kingdom, 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5. It's a great game. Buy it, play it. And that's going to be it for me. Have a good night. Happy Zelda Day. And comment what your experience is going to be like. What your experience is like. What's your hype level for Tears of the Kingdom if you watched this before. And if you have it in your hands, tell me what you think of the game in general. Thanks for watching.